Welcome back to the CSS video series to learn about more how to manipulate our web pages through CSS. This time, we like to go through some basic visual formatting knowledge. There are ways to find out the normal flow of the CSS. The normal flow always left to the right, top to the bottom, and they will be render the text in the Western languages and the familiar text layout of the traditional HTML documents. Notice that some of the flow directions may be changed in non-Western languages. Now first, we look into something called the containing block. Now the containing block is formed by the content edge of the nearest block level, or table cell, or inline block, ancestor box. The containing block for the P element is the div element. That is the example shown on the slide. The div's containing block is the body. You don't need to worry about the inline elements since the way they are laid out doesn't depend directly on the containing blocks. Now here we like to know more about what are element boxes. For each element, there is a box surrounding the display of the element. Obviously, there is a content area, which we see that in the gray color. Now, the content area is surrounded by the padding, so we can control the amount of the surrounding padding. So this is an optional control. And then we have the borders of the padding. And then we have the margins for this element block in comparisons with the other element blocks. And there are a number of properties when we look through the boxes. Now to look closer, we can zoom in to details of what is in the box. There are some technical terms that we like to go through. Well, we can see that there is a right margin, there is a bottom margin, and which is highlighted in the yellow area. And then the borders in between the margin and the padding, we have the top border, we have the left border, and inside the padding, which are the contents, the padding are highlighted in green. The content has width and height. So we have the horizontal and vertical layouts for the box inside. Here we like to know more about the horizontal properties of the element block. There are a number of properties horizontally, including margin left, border left, padding left, width of the content, padding right, border right, and margin right. Now at the time that we like to control the margins, paddings, and the content properties, we have something called auto to minimize our effort to set up the actual parameters and values. Using auto can help us to set the width of the element's content and the left-right margins. So the remaining properties can be set as specific values. The default is a width of 0. Here we look at one example. So in this example, when we look into the CSS rule, the P element will have a number of properties. Margin left is auto, margin right is only 100 pixels, as well as the width, background color, height. So the example illustrates how auto, the left margin, can be adjusted. And this time it is 200 pixels here. Here we look into one other example. That is, auto will be forced to apply when there are times we have some conflicting situations in our margin definitions. Now, for this CSS rule, the element P has two properties. The margin left is 100 px, as well as the margin right is 100 px. Now, somehow we cannot satisfy both constraints. So this is an example of over constraint. In this case, we follow the default flow of the text. Remember, it is from left to right. So at the end, the display would be taking the margin left as 100 pixels. Then the right margin is forced to be auto and now set to be 200 pixels. Now, the way to change the width to auto, in this example, the P element, the CSS rule of the P element, will have the width auto. So here we have the display result on the screen. Now, at the time when we set up the properties of the element block, we can use more than one auto in our property values. So in this example, we have the margin left as auto, margin right as auto also. So here we have more than one autos. And the ending result is the element is center in the middle. Now notice that not only the margin left or the margin right can be set auto, the width and as well as the height can be set auto also. So we'll discuss more at a later time point. Now before we set up our links in terms of pixels numbers, we have a different way also. In this slide, we can have a rule in CSS setting up the links as percentages. Here in this example, the width is 67%, padding right 5%, as well as padding left, and the margin right is auto, and the margin left is 5% also. So altogether, the remaining margin right is not setted. So what is left for margin right? Very simple calculation here. 100 minus 67 minus 5, 5, and 5. So the right margin will have 18% relatively to the window. So this is a relative length definition method here also. Now we have been talking about the horizontal formatting and different controls of the margins, paddings, and the content. This is similar at the time when we deal with vertical. We have top margins, bottom margins. There are borders surrounding the padding area, and then with top padding, bottom padding, as well as the height. So at the time that we have the definitions, the height would be determined by its content, as well as affecting the width of the content also. Now, at the time when we specify the heights, very similar to what we have been observing for the horizontal links, we have two examples here. One is absolute, and one is relative. We can see that in the second line, the style equal to height 50%. So it's half as tall. In the previous slides, we noticed that the div has a height defined, and then the P element block would utilize the relative percentage to define the height. In this slice, here we have the div style height is equal to auto. Again, the P height is 50%. Because of the dvi element block is already set to auto, then the P style height 50% is not meaningful. Therefore, it's not set half as tall, and the height is reset to auto property. Now, auto can be applied to heights also. But notice that there are only two things that you can set to autos for the heights. One is the margins of the auto heights, the top and bottom margins also, as well as the content can be set to auto. The top and the bottom paddings and the borders are default with a width of 0. While we continue to talk about auto heights, well, there are some small and subtle differences at the time when we set auto for the heights. Here we have one example. The first two lines is using style height auto. And then the margins for the P element, the top one is 2em as well as the bottom one. Now, because of the auto in the dvi element, that is the parent element of the P element, then the 2em is not in effect. However, when we look into a second example, our second example is the third and the fourth line. Now here in this third line, the div element will have the border defined. So we have the border top is 1 pixel solid, as well as for the border bottom here. Now in this case, the P element with the margin top as well as the margin bottom, the 2em values, would be in effect. And here we show on the screen how these two different results would be coming on the screen. Now, at the time that we define CSS rules, particularly, we may want to notice that there are collapsing vertical margins. Here one have an example. For the li element, we define margin top as 10 pixels and margin bottom as 15 pixels. Now when we define what we had in the previous slides, the distance between the adjacent list items is 15 pixels, not 25 anymore. Because adjacent margins are collapsed along the vertical axis. The smaller of the two margins would be eliminated in the favor of the larger one. While it's not only for one single element or the same type of elements. When we look into this example, we have 3 CSS rules, UL, LI, and H1. They are defining multiple margins. And the last item, bottom margin, is of 20 pixels. UL, bottom margin, is of 15 pixels, where H1, the margin is of 28 pixels. The margins can be collapsed, and the distance between the end of the Li element and the beginning of the H1 element is now becoming 28 pixels. Thanks for watching all the videos. I hope you now know some of the basic knowledge of the CSS. and enjoy web programming. Thank you.